It's Sunday, March 15, 2026. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is the New York Times best-selling author of A Well-Trained Wife, her memoir of escape from Christian patriarchy. Her second book, I Belong to Me, A Survivor's Guide to Recovery and Hope After Religious Trauma, is available for pre-order now. Tia Levings, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back.
Tia, I want to start unusually with the war in Iran and see how it connects to your experience and speciality. This is after the non-profit Military Religious Freedom Foundation said that it's received over 200 complaints from over 50 military installations that commanders have been invoking Christian rhetoric in describing the war against Iran, much of it pertaining to end times prophecy. Now, one commander told officers at a briefing last week that Trump was anointed by Jesus to light the signal fire in Iran to cause Armageddon and mark his return to earth. It was independent journalist Jonathan Larson was the first to report on the military's religious messaging. This is an area that I don't think the media covers enough. And I'm sure there are reasons for that. But, hopefully we can get into it and you can explain some of this. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, or Secretary of War, as he likes to be known, is a Christian nationalist. And there are, Christian nationalism is increasingly becoming the kind of power behind the Trump regime's desire to do what it's doing both domestically and internationally. But let's just talk to this holy war for a moment. What do you read when you hear that these are the types of diktat and conversations that are going on within the U.S. military right now?
Yeah, my first thought when this story first broke was relief that there is an agency and an avenue for people who are not affiliated with this to file a complaint. We have an avenue for pushing back. That's relieving. Armageddon, the whole way that was framed, it's rife with dog whistles. It's deliberately confusing. It reflects a group that is not monolithic in their end times belief. But it is terrifying. And so for me, it goes back to my very core trauma of being afraid I was going to be raptured before I got a chance to grow up. But it's really important who said what. Pete Hegseth isn't the one who used the word Armageddon because he's a Christian nationalist to a point. He's a dominionist writing within Christian nationalism. Of course, he wants a Christian nation. It's a step onto a Christian globe. Whereas a good portion of Christian nationalists are nationalists. They don't want to be in global conflict. They are dispensationalists, and they believe that the book of Revelation is yet to be fulfilled. And those are really important distinctions when we're talking about what's being invoked, what kind of peacemaking is being attempted, who's involved, what countries are involved. All of these little nuances behind the scenes become important, but they're so confusing. I understand why journalists are not sure what to say or how to represent it or how to even sift through it.
So maybe we should start by asking how this connects to Israel, because really this is Israel's war, and they were just waiting, I guess, for a president who was dumb enough to kind of agree to bomb Iran, because no other president wanted to do that, and for obvious reasons. And the culture runs so deep in Iran, and I don't think Trump really had the first idea about not just culture but religion and how embedded it is, and not least, of course, the kind of Ayatollah and the dictatorial regime there. But so there was Trump's naivety that contributed to that. But we often hear from a lot of GOP senators, and they talk about Israel as if it is the ultimate for them. And we've heard it from Lindsey Graham this last week. He's like, I'm with Israel, whatever. And firmly believes that this is his kind of absolution and retribution and all of the opportunities that he will have, I don't know, to end up in the Holy Land maybe. So talk to that for me.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting area for someone with my background, which I am not a scholar or a theologian. I am somebody who was a member in these churches, and I took end times eschatology very seriously because you're finding out, like what is my role in the end times, and what does the end of the planet look like, and are there other alternatives to belief? So one of the things you're pointing out here is how different these Christians can be. Lindsey Graham is not the same kind of Christian as Pete Hegseth, is not the same kind of Christian as Paula White. And you've also touched on how malleable Donald Trump is and how he will really follow whatever suggestion seems interesting to him at the time. So he will do what someone he thinks is cool will tell him what to do. And that's really dangerous. The voices that he has around him are, they have varying views on Israel and Armageddon, but they all want this dominion. They're okay with war. They're okay with using this as a tool of manipulation. So Israel is dicey. It's a complicated issue, even in Christianity, even more so, I think, to outsiders that are like, why are you so obsessed with Israel? Why are we so involved with these matters? And it comes back again to this end times eschatology. So evangelicals are dispensationalists who believe that they are, I'm going to dumb this and not dumb it down, but I'm going to simplify it as much as I can. The dispensationalists believe that we are like siblings with Israel. We are brothers in Christ. Their interests are our interests. And when we promote them, we are mutually benefiting towards this new Jerusalem where the temple will be built. And this is where the second coming of Christ comes in. But it's a very, sibling warm relationship with Israel. You take someone like Pete Hegseth, who is fed by Doug Wilson. They are dominionists. And this is really important in their eschatology. They believe the book of Revelation already happened, and that the 1,000-year reign that comes after Armageddon is more of a symbolism. And they also believe that they are the elect. They have replaced God's chosen. So if Israel was God's chosen race, it is now the Christian elect that replaces them. So their take on it is what's yours is mine is ours. It's very, we don't really care if you die because we're going to get it anyway kind of efficiency. So when those are blurred together, they do complement one another because the dispensationalists understand that there will be holy wars and, a tribulation period and this obvious conflict to gain control of Israel and the Holy Land. Whereas the Doug Wilson dominionists are more like, conflict's inevitable as long as enemies of God exist. So we need to eliminate enemies of God so that we can live in peace and harmony in Jesus's reign. So you see how those are not at odds with one another, but they may have important distinctions when it comes to policy.
Well, it's kind of proof that multiple things can be true or untrue at the same time.
Exactly.
Based upon your beliefs. Because if we look at Israel, or certainly let's not look at Israel, let's look at Benjamin Netanyahu. Because I don't
that's different, right?
Right. I don't necessarily think that he is representative of Israel as a whole, but he is certainly using it as a human shield for himself at the moment. He is similar to Trump in as much as there are so many, indictments against him for various things from fraud to everything else. And so he has to stay in power because he doesn't want to go to prison in the same way that Trump had to win the last election because he didn't want to go to prison. And so I suppose they've found a kind of common friendship in that. But I would say that Netanyahu's view of Israel and consequently of Iran and the impetus for Israel kind of leading the charge on this war is different again, right?
Right. And it's important to note that as far as Netanyahu's concerned as a Zionist, his interest is definitely with evangelicals because they don't want the eradication of Israel. They are like siblings with them. So they're going to be much more invested in the promotion of their interests. And so if you're someone whispering in Trump's ear, you're going to definitely support Israel and push for that, aka Lindsey Graham. He's all about this holy war. But it's also important to note that Lindsey Graham was noted in the Epstein files that the timing of this there's no articulated reason for this war, but the timing of it comes when we are looking at release of files. We're talking about imprisonments again, investigations, and the approval rating was at, historic lows. So all of it's really convenient when you need to pull a voting base back. You want to get them excited again about this is the right way to go. I can think of no more effective way than getting to people's core trauma that they're afraid they're going to be raptured and that there's going to be worldwide destruction in Armageddon. That will get people back in church and back in the seats so quickly. So that was my first red flag. I was like, this is going to pull everybody back, because this disapproval rating of Trump had been rising and the momentum towards exposure had been rising. And then boom, all of a sudden on a Friday night, we're at war with Iran. Where did that come from?
Yes.
It's too sus. It's too convenient.
Right. Well, the timing was very odd, considering that Jared Kushner was and Steve Witkoff were in negotiations with Iranian leadership right up until this moment. Now, maybe we're learning that was a bit of a decoy, because Trump was already moving his armada, as he described it, into the region. And, Witkoff and Kushner are realtors, sending those boys to do serious negotiations seems like a bit of a joke. But, maybe everything has a purpose. And then there's another lane, I suppose, as we're identifying these kind of lanes that give credence to this military action. And that, I suppose, is that there is an onus on the US and the UK and some other allies who were responsible for the creation of Israel in 1948. And so they feel a certain allegiance to supporting Israel, even though that position is becoming increasingly unpopular after the atrocities in Gaza.
Right. I feel for them. I think historically, to support something that you believed in and you thought would lead to peace is valid. And then when you're given new information, you have to adjust. And Gaza is a lot of new information at the lengths that they will go to. It's not necessarily an ally that we could stand by anymore. But these are really long-seated policies, and those are real humans. And we have so much confusing information of the language that we use and the descriptors that we use. It gets really tangled. I think what comes to the bottom line for me is that no one calling himself the Secretary of War is in favor of peace. And when you know that that person is also a dominionist who believes in eternal conflict until we blow the world up and leave only Christians left, like in Christian nationalism, they only want Christians left. In the world, they only want Christians left. So that is really going to steer the decisions that they're making and the way they present to allies and the way that they behave on a world stage.
And potentially domestically too, as we're seeing them buying these huge warehouses to obviously house not just migrants, but potentially American citizens who don't fit that mold either. Right. Okay, let's not jump ahead of ourselves. I want to talk about your Substack for a second, though, because you wrote a piece entitled How Christians Use Armageddon to Scare People into Loyalty. Just explain how that connects to the place we find ourselves in with regard to the war on Iran. And whose loyalty are you talking about?
Yeah, I'm really talking about evangelical and Christian dominionists, Christian nationalists that have veered away from church. So it's that callback I mentioned before, calling to their core trauma. What we have are ideological lanes that are very cult-like. I think there's a lot of merit to calling MAGA a cult. But as they begin to get new information and they start to crack, and we've seen this leaving MAGA movement, and we've seen the disapproval ratings, and people are starting to question if this is what they wanted when they voted. Our grocery prices aren't better. We're back into a global war. All of these things that they thought they were getting with Trump's vote, they're disillusioned and they're falling away. So there are certain manipulation tactics that preachers have long used in these groups to control with fear and manipulate with fear. And so this idea that Christ can come again, like a twinkling of an eye, like a thief in the night, when you least expect it. We have a lot of media that's been produced, the Left Behind book series, the Left Behind movies, the Thief in the Night series from the 70s, it's like majorly scarring for Gen X children. This idea that you could just be walking down the street and one of you is taken away, for lack of belief and for a lack of loyalty. So, it's used to, pull us back into the fold when you start getting a little too critical in your thinking or a little too off the path that they want you on. That's what they do. And it's deliberately confusing word salad. Like, these terms are not easy. I like to emphasize that for people. they're not easy to understand, even for theologians who devote their whole lives to studying them. And it's all speculative. None of us can know any more than, like, where do we really go when we die? What really happens when we die? They don't know what's really going to happen at the end of the world, but they've presupposed that it has to happen. That informs their worldview and builds a worldview towards destruction and conflict. They aren't looking for peace, because they believe that that's not attainable without a war-clearing event, like the worldwide flood or any other time that Jesus had to, or God the Father had to wipe the planet clean and start fresh, just wipe it all away and start over. That's the mindset they're in.
So fear is baked into this.
Yes, very much so.
Right. It's so interesting, isn't it? And I feel like it's important that we learn. It's important that we understand. And whilst we might not share the belief system, that you're never really going to get your head around the actions of some of these events and some of these individuals, certainly, until you understand what makes them tick.
Yeah, and it's really cult-like thought. Even if it doesn't necessarily qualify as a cult, it is cult-like spells and thoughts that you can't reason your way through. You can't cognitively solve when someone's core belonging and all of their safety is threatened if they step a toe out. That is not someone who's going to take a logical argument very seriously, or science and research, or, any of that very seriously, because they can't risk the lack of belonging that they're going to find in their church. This is a threat of not just being disappeared by God. This is, if you get left behind, you're denied all resources. You're completely locked out of society. You have to accept the mark of the beast if you want to get gas, and then ultimately everything that you worked for and want is going to be destroyed. So it's terrifying to be a parent. It's terrifying to understand that your 7-year-old, your child, could be taken and you're not. These are core abandonment fears with God. And it will do what it needs to do every time. I mean, these were books that were on the bestsellers list for years. They snap people to attention and keep them in the belief. And I don't really think we can take the Left Behind phenomenon out of Christian nationalism. They are one in the kind. But when you look at someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's really upset that we're at global war, she's a great example of a Christian nationalist who's a different kind of Christian than Pete Hegseth.
Right. And that differential is important, isn't it? And I think so. I think that's something we should keep coming back to in this conversation, because, not all religions are created equally, but not all Christians are created equally. And if we are critical of Christian nationalism, we are not critical of Christianity for a second. So let's just talk about the definitions for a moment, because I'm sure people watching this will be screaming at their televisions or at their phones, separation of church and state, right? That's where all of this kind of starts. And in fact, Rolling Stone wrote an article, G.I. Jihad, Iran War Blurs the Line Between Religion and the Constitution, as military commanders are reportedly speaking about the Iran offensive as if it is a Christian crusade. So for those who aren't kind of up on this church and state issue and how this has changed just from the switch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, it's only been, a year and a few months since the line is not just blurred anymore, it's erased, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is unfortunately one area where most Christian nationalists agree with one another. They don't believe in a constitution that separates church and state. They don't believe in a constitution much of the time. They don't believe in democracy. They want to replace it with theocracy. So we'll hear, sermons in Pentagon statements. We will hear scripture, which Pete Hegseth he does cross that line all the time because he doesn't think the line exists. It's important to note that Hegseth has a book called American Crusade. These crusades are designed to eliminate enemies of Christianity, which they believe is anyone who doesn't agree with them. But to be a Christian, all you have to do is claim belief in Christ. It's very broad. There's so many different expressions underneath that. And what we are seeing in 2026 is the culmination of this movement that said, let's unite all Christians under this single issue voting for abortion, and we will pretend to be all of one like mind until we get through. Ultimately, the Mormons, the Christian nationalists, the evangelicals, the Dominionists, the Presbyterians, they do not all believe the other is a Christian. because their theological differences matter that much to them. But they've been willing to set that aside in order to get to this point. And so I think some of the tension that we're seeing is that their distinctions are actually really important to them, and they reveal through policy, but they have enough in common where they're using that momentum to take over and reframe American society.
Pete Hegseth himself, I've tried to watch all of the speeches that he's made, and he's been doing a few press briefings recently. And we heard that his team decided that they didn't want any press in there because he didn't like the unflattering photographs. Of course,
he's precious.
Yeah, he is a matinee idol after all, and he is playing the role of the defense secretary, and may get an Oscar nomination for it. I don't know, but that's the problem with him, isn't it? That it is all style over substance. But what's problematic about the substance is this is a very personal war for him. He said in his most recent press conference, that he served, with it's his former members of his own team, his platoon, who have lost their lives because of Iran, and that this is him kind of getting back at them in a way. And I was really shocked to hear this rhetoric because, of course, as the defense secretary, you need to keep your personal opinions the hell out of any military decisions.
That's right.
But he didn't just stop at that. He just kept going and kept going and kept going about this personal crusade. Now, if he's the main person who has the ear of the commander-in-chief on this stuff, I'm sure there are a couple of others, but, if Stephen Miller's in there as well, we know what his views are on foreign policy. That, is it any wonder that Trump started a war with no idea about how it was going to play out or indeed end?
No, I don't wonder at all. I don't know that Hegseth knows who he is apart from violence. And it reminds me, we wouldn't want a doctor operating on a patient. Like, you're supposed to have a level of professionalism that allows you to distance yourself from that. And his just ineptitude, his just like religious or not, his general ineptitude is on display here. I'm also really concerned that Trump said that he had a hunch, he had a feeling that they were going to attack, and that information came from Kushner, who's his son-in-law, who's a realtor. This is all more Trump Tower stuff. None of this is normal for the way policy is done and the way leadership should be done. I don't know what the commanders and our military leaders are doing right now. I don't know how they're handling this. Like, having this for their boss is baffling to me.
But it's like a family business, isn't it?
It is a mob.
Right? Yeah,
Yes.
it is because Jared Kushner, don't forget, has a lifelong relationship with Netanyahu. Netanyahu used to stay at his house as a kid. I mean, the families are intrinsically linked. And so, of course, there is a bias there. But the concern, I guess, for everybody now is, who is the enemy? And I'm not convinced that Trump knows who the enemy is. I mean, a few days ago, he said he was doing this for China because China would benefit and it's his pleasure to help them out. I mean, none of this narrative makes any sense.
No, he's addled with dementia. There's nobody checking that. I constantly wonder what information he's being fed. If he lives in a land of AI generated memes that tell him what he wants to hear, and he really believes the things that he's saying, it's very upside down, and it just continues to be so. And I put a lot of hope in the natural progression of lifetimes and the way things, we know how they go. Because I don't know how long this is sustainable, and I have a lot of faith that unsustainable situations won't sustain just by their very nature. Yes. So what does that look like, and who gets hurt in the meantime? I'm a military parent, and it makes me extremely angry to think that my children could be used this way, that America's children could be pawns in this kind of ludicrous situation.
Well, the other irony of this is that Trump ran on bringing down the cost of living, groceries and gas prices, and no new wars, no new foreign wars. And yet...
So straight Fs. He gets failure across the board.
He certainly does. And that will be very problematic for him in the midterms. Even if they plan to rig the election, which to all intents and purposes, that is very much on the cards, it could turn out to be too big to rig, because nobody wants this war apart from about 6 people working in the White House.
Right, who have a vested interest in staying out of prison.
The ironically, also the gas prices and I should say that the energy crisis that is unfolding because of the Strait of Hormuz and Iran playing a kind of long game there in cutting off this supply of oil and gas and fertilizer and all of the things that the US needs, not to mention the rest of the world. We might find that this war comes to an end for financial reasons rather than ideological ones.
Yeah. I mean, again, I come back to worldview. They aren't concerned with that because the people in charge are not concerned with our climate or with the denigration of the planet or the loss of humanity or the loss of finances. All they care about is their own vested interest and their safety, their money. So I hope it hits them in a place where they hurt before they hurt other people. But, you're never going to hear somebody who believes in Armageddon care about the planet.
So let's talk a little bit about Armageddon. It's not a sentence I ever thought I would say out loud, Tia,
I'm sorry.
to be honest. But, this is where we find ourselves.
Indeed.
Is it the case that targeting a school, a girls' school in this case, because we've now had this military investigation, and I think they've initially discovered that the US is responsible for the Tomahawk missile strike on the Iranian elementary school. This happened on February 28th, at the very beginning of the war, and the school building was apparently now the result of a targeting mistake by the US military, which was conducting strikes on an adjacent Iranian base, of which the school building was formerly a part of. And so we're hearing that they might have been working off of old maps. Now, this has meant the death toll, I think, is now at least 175 people, most of them children, and potentially most of them girls. The fact that the Trump regime refused to be drawn on this suggests to me that there wasn't any empathy associated with this. And this is why I'm interested in your perspective on how they could do this and not pause operations. I mean, if they found out that this had happened, any civilized nation that was involved in military action would probably cease fire temporarily after getting this news and regroup because of the reaction ricocheting around the world. The reaction has ricocheted around the world, but it doesn't seem to have affected the Trump administration.
Only to the point that we keep bringing it up and talking about it, and that forces them to have to pay attention to something they would like to just go away. I felt that it was very on brand, this recklessness, this bull in a china shop. Like, they don't care about collateral damage. It's poetic and it's ironic that it's a girls' school. I don't know how premeditated that was. It would be appropriate. Like, I can totally understand that it could be on purpose, or it could have just been, sloppy. We have unreliable intelligence. We have unreliable records and processes because of DOJ and the way that they conduct business. So none of it's reliable, but they don't care. And the only balance that there is for us to make them care, to keep bringing it up, to prove the point, to make the globe upset. I think ultimately we're going to need global accountability, that if there's ever a Nuremberg, it's going to come from other countries getting involved with what happened here. Because this is a great example. They wiped it clean. They did what they wanted. Oopsie, some kids got hurt. Yeah. They don't really care about kids getting hurt. That's not on their, they don't care. That's a global, I'm using the word global here inappropriately probably, but it's across the board, very consistent with their character towards children. They don't really care. They're not really moved. And they've been working against empathy in their communities actively for the past 8 to 10 years. Empathy has been under a direct attack. They think empathy is weakness. And so, Hegseth is not going to make any room for empathy. He doesn't care any more than he cared about all the other boats that they blew people up. They don't care.
And I suppose that ties into the gun debate in the US. and with school shootings and
it's all consistent.
Thoughts and prayers. It's all tied up in the same place.
Yes, with Trump saying, "Well, people die." He doesn't care. He just people are going to die, and he doesn't care that it's preventable. He wants what he wants.
And I suppose, you mentioned Nuremberg. This is now a problem for the likes of Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth and Pam Bondi and, all of them, including Netanyahu. And this is, I think, the reason why they don't intend on ever leaving office, because then that opens them up to scrutiny from the International Criminal Court, for example, for war crimes and everything else. Do you think that plays a big part in the duration of this conflict and maybe others too?
Yeah, it's self-protective, whatever they need to do to protect their own interests. And to breaking the law, that doesn't bother them. They're there because they broke the law. We're having this conversation because they're breaking the law. But they never feel like that applies to them. And that's true in these households all the way up. It's the same characterization and the same cocky arrogance that they don't need to do what the rest of us need to do. They're going to, do what they want.
It's hard, isn't it? Because the media in the rest of the world is still judging these people as if they're normal. Like that they feel things and they do have empathy and that they would be riled to maybe change course if they knew that 175 children had died. But what you're saying is we shouldn't be judging these people by civil, the characteristics of civility.
I think we can understand them. We should absolutely judge them. I think we should not normalize what they're doing. Yeah. Just because they're doing it and just because they're getting away with it right now does not mean that it's good for humanity or what we want for any of our societies. So the more that we push back and the more that we call it out as inhuman, law-breaking, disrespectful, not allowed, that we are the accountability right now. And I don't think we can give that up and retain our own humanity.
So Armageddon is a very strong word. The fear is, and Trump has hinted at this, that the big one is coming. Now, I am of the belief that he is so naive about modern warfare that he thinks he could win a nuclear war and walk away from it. I don't think he truly understands the consequences. He refers to the N-word, nuclear, and has all this kind of weird banter about it. But it could be the case that they end up with so much egg on their face that Trump loses patience just by nature of his dementia and his narcissistic personality disorder. And he's like, just nuke them or atomic bomb them or something. That is a conversation that obviously nobody wants to have, but we're starting to hear this mainly around kitchen tables.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I think the more we introduce those ideas and accustom ourselves to them, the more familiar we get, the more less outrageous it gets to consider. But we all knew when this was part of the campaigning, we knew it was dangerous to give him nuclear codes because of who he is, because he's self-interested and impulsive on his best day. That's not even taking into account the delusions and dementia and the shrinking brain and all of the things that happen. And it's so important the people around him, who his cabinet is, they all have this. There's no stop measure in place. So yeah, I'm concerned about it because I know, and I've always been, I will say this little 5-year-old me was concerned about this. I've always understood that nuclear warfare is how they achieve the thing they're scaring us with in the Bible, that there is, it's not an abstract threat. There's a way to do this.
And there is an element of ethnic cleansing to it as well. I feel that domestically, but in a way, they feel like they're doing God's work, ridding the planet of people of color.
Oh, and non-believers, anyone that's not like them.
Right.
This is very important. We haven't really used the word ethnic cleansing in a while, but that's exactly what it is. It's getting rid of anybody who's not like them, which in America, that's white Christian nationalists. But that's all people of color, all people of other faiths and beliefs, definitely the Muslims. That's talked about.
It kind of adds credence to the Muslim ban, doesn't it? It kind of makes sense now when you look at it.
It's the reason for it.
Right. When you look at it through your lens, that, to ban every country that is majority Muslim from entering the US, and then they added like 19 more countries recently. It makes no sense. And yet, the moment we look at it through that prism of Christian nationalism, excuse me, you're like, okay, now I understand where they're coming from.
Right. It's a means to an end.
Remarkable. Okay, we have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the other reason potentially for this war, and that is a distraction from the Epstein files. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I didn't realize how much a mattress could actually change my sleep until I switched to the Lisa, and from my very first night, it just felt different. Like the perfect balance of soft and supportive. You get that cozy sink-in feeling when you lay down, but you're still totally supported, so I'm not waking up stiff or tossing around trying to get comfortable. What I love is that Lisa designs their mattresses around how people actually sleep, whether you're a side sleeper, back sleeper, or someone who moves around a lot during the night. They've really thought through the comfort and support. And the quality is incredible. Lisa mattresses are designed and assembled right here in the US. They come with free shipping, easy returns, and a 120-night sleep trial, so you can really take the time to see how it works for you. So if you've been thinking about upgrading your sleep, it's a great time. Go to Lisa.com for 20% off mattresses, plus get an extra $50 off with promo code WEEKEND. That's LEESA.com, promo code WEEKEND for 20% off mattresses, plus an extra $50 off. Support the show and let them know we sent you after checkout. That's Lisa.com, promo code WEEKEND. Picture this. It's late at night, and I'm doing what we all do, scrolling and online shopping when I probably should be asleep. I find something I've been looking for, add it to my cart, maybe grab one or two other things, and then I hit checkout, and of course my wallet is nowhere near me. Normally that's the moment when I'm digging through saved passwords, trying 3 different logins, resetting something, the whole thing. But sometimes you see it, that purple Shop Pay button at checkout. One tap, all my info is already saved, and boom, purchase complete. Honestly, in the chaotic world of online shopping, it's one of my favorite little features. That button is powered by Shopify, the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and around 10% of all e-commerce in the US. And if you're thinking of starting your own thing online, Shopify makes it surprisingly simple. You can build a beautiful online store with hundreds of ready-to-use templates to match your brand's style. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. That's shopify.com/weekend. We're back with Tia Levings here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. So there have been multiple excuses given for the reason for this war, to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon, even though they already obliterated Iran's nuclear capability just a few months earlier. Aside from the fact that, well, Iran are just bad, Iranians are just bad people, and they're doing the Lord's work here. It's becoming increasingly difficult to hear that from a dictator in Donald Trump. Domestically, his efforts are anything but democratic. So to kind of bring democracy to other nations doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But that aside, the Epstein files is a story that for Trump will not go away. And from the survivor's perspective, must not go away. And I think that this is what's so important about this story. It's not about Jeffrey Epstein. It's not about Ghislaine Maxwell. It's not really about Donald Trump. It's about getting justice for the survivors, and that we recognize the importance of taking seriously the calls of people, but especially women and girls who have survived these horrendous traumatic experiences. And the Epstein files is effectively the biggest cover-up of a child sex trafficking ring in American history. The cover-up is still going on. And we're hearing more and more about that even now. In late July, an FBI agent asked colleagues to get started on a sensitive task relating to Epstein, listing the name of 14 prominent men. Donald Trump's name was at the top of that list. This is new reporting that we're hearing about Trump files that have gone missing in the release of the Epstein files. We're also now hearing James Comer, who's the House Oversight Committee chairman. He actually said on Fox a couple of days ago that Trump's Justice Department scuttled a state investigation of Epstein's New Mexico ranch during his first presidency. And the ranch is now coming under renewed scrutiny by state officials over unverified allegations that the now deceased sex offender had bodies buried nearby. How much of the war effort do you think is a distraction? Because we talked earlier about Trump suddenly deciding to go bomb Iran and claiming he had a hunch, but the hunch could have been the fact that these revelations about his name in the Epstein files were about to come out.
Yeah, it always brings to mind Steve Bannon for me. Steve Bannon is the strategic mind behind timing, and he's all over those files. He's very aware of the different factions of followers and what will appeal to them. And so I really, as soon as I heard the bombing, as soon as I heard about Friday night, and where we had been in the Epstein momentum, I was like, yeah, this is happening. This is happening, and they're going to time it carefully. And we have already seen to a much lesser extent that kind of timing being used, like news that breaks over the weekend, news that breaks in the middle of the night, the restriction of journalists and access to sound information. So this seemed like the big one to me. This was like, okay, we're going to pull out all the stops here and make this stop. And we were just getting so close. The Clintons had testified, and, those were not made public right away. But what they said when they were was pretty damning. And then Zorro Ranch. And there's a story about Sasha Riley online that circulates a lot and that needs to be followed up on and verified. So, all of this momentum building. It's really a litmus test, I think, for societies if they're going to take seriously ethics and children and life and transparency. And this is the thing. And we've seen politicians break over this. We've seen loyalists break. And that's, I'm sure, very dangerous to the regime. Well,
we're discovering that everything is connected. Epstein connected to Russia now. That really was not part of the original thinking. And leverage being placed in certain places, including Israel as well, connections with Epstein and Israel and Russia. And who'd have thought that, like, the Iran war and this sex trafficking story would be linked? But it seems to be playing out in that direction. Do you think that the appetite in the US for getting to the bottom of the Epstein files is it something that people understand? I mean, even these kind of Christian nationalist families, how do they reconcile with the fact that Trump's name is mentioned more than any other in these files? Is there any leverage there?
I think it's fascinating to consider this. So what you have is a voting base. The evangelical base doesn't historically take abuse against children seriously. They move their pastors around. They shame survivors into silence. This, like, getting them to care about children that were in sex parties and were molested at an island is not really going to move the needle for them. However, there are mothers who are angry. There are voters who really did take this seriously. And the crazier it gets, the more they cannot suspend the disbelief. They are starting to break, and it is starting to bother them to at least know the truth of what's going on. Yeah. Or the closest thing that we can get to it. At some point, enough is enough for everyone. And it's interesting to me to see what that thing is. Sometimes it's not humanity. Sometimes it's money, or sometimes it's the fact that we're at war when he said we weren't going to go to war. And that wakens them up to pay attention to the other things too. But these stories are beyond the pale many times. And there is so many occasions where what was projected was a confession, like the Pizzagate was real, but it was really the Trump administration. What? And, dead babies and all of this and the breeding program and the stalls, the horse stalls and the dentist and all these things that are in these files. At some point, it even breaks the we can't trust the news, nothing's real. Right. At some point, you have to even admit, some of it is, and how much of it
meta,
is,
isn't it? I mean, I suppose that's the issue.
Very much so.
It's projection of things claiming that the Democrats did them when in fact it was Republicans all along.
Yeah, that's Bannon, right?
Right, and that's why they say these things out loud with such confidence and why they appear to know things before they've been corroborated, because they're actually telling their own stories.
It's that psychology is astounding to me, that the moxie to pull that off and the amount of evil it takes to say something like that out loud and to know that you can manipulate someone with it. I've seen it interpersonally to a much lesser extent, so I know the pattern holds, but it's still unprecedented, in human history.
Right. And also, I think that the more we become educated about what went on back then and understand the terminology. I mean, you may remember Trump saying, he took my girls from the Mar-a-Lago spa. He was talking about Virginia Giuffre. Mm-hmm. But now that we understand what that really means, he's describing trafficking. Mm-hmm. And taking them from Mar-a-Lago and taking them to Epstein Island and giving them or selling them, or, we've heard these horrific stories now that you put these component parts together and the puzzle starts to make sense. And it goes way beyond massages in West Palm Beach. This is the most horrendous, horrific, traumatic experiences for these young people who were desperate and just wanted to feel like they were part of something, and they were taken advantage of.
Yeah, I think so. Trafficking is also going to fall on deaf ears if they're evangelical ears. They have human trafficking in so many different areas of their belief system. And so I don't know that that's going to move it. But when you get into the details of the stories, this is similar to the Catholic priest scandal when it broke. There were enough people who had been meddled with by a family member that, or a priest, there were enough people who'd had a parallel experience that it broke their hearts and it woke them up, and they stepped away from the church, and then the church experienced this mass exodus. And I look for things like that again, like what detail of what story is it that's going to resonate with them enough that they'll relate to enough that they will crack and pull away. They were there. I feel like we were on our way to that right before the Iranian war. If the news cycle had not been flooded with a whole nother story. And I hope this is continuing to happen behind the scenes. I take hope from the Zorro investigation. I hope they find things. They've had a lot of time to move and hide things. So yes, that's true. But, the more that this can be happening and unfolding behind the scenes, eventually truth comes out. Karma is a bitch. It does show up. So I feel like the truth will rise.
Well, the late Virginia Giuffre alleged in her memoir that she met politicians and CEOs at the ranch. Epstein also reportedly had plans to use the ranch in a eugenics-inspired plot to seed the world with his DNA.
Doesn't that make you wonder where those children are?
Yeah. I mean, we've spoken about eugenics before, you and I, and this is something that presents itself amongst so many of the people that are in this orbit. I mean, Elon Musk is another big eugenics guy. Yep. Trump, of course, is a big eugenics guy, always going on about, my good-looking friend over there and all this stuff, and having great genes. I mean, when you get into the weeds of this mindset, it is so far removed from reality, but it also directly connects to Hitler's version of eugenics and the white Aryan race in Nazi Germany. And I think that's why we need to be concerned.
Yeah, when you mentioned the warehouses, you meant like we have the systems in place to replicate what happened in the past. And that really just ties into the whole nostalgic movement, this ethical regression that we're having. I think we're at risk for all of it. I again heard a little snag of hope when you said it's so removed from our daily lives and from, what's ordinary. Because eventually people get sick of that. They get sick of, the decadence, the crazy Mar-a-Lago parties, the opulence that's being flaunted in our face while we are struggling to pay gas, to pay healthcare, to pay groceries. At some point, the common man is going to wipe this away. There's no way that this is going to be, they're not going to be manipulatable again. You can't, what's the screw me once, twice, thrice, eventually they've had enough. So, I want it all to come forward. I want it all exposed. I don't believe it will stand if we can do that, if we can push for that transparency. And I think it's up to us to make sure it never goes away. Just keep bringing this up. I like it when, Caroline said, we're moving on from Epstein. And the response was, the hell we are. Yeah. Like, of course we're not moving on. Right. And that's the power of the people to say, we are absolutely talking about this until you give us what we want.
What is problematic, unfortunately, is that the way that the DOJ and the FBI have handled the Epstein files has been so amateurish to the point that, contrary to Congress's explicit directive to protect victims, the records that were released included email addresses and nude photos in which the names and faces of publicly identified and non-public victims could be seen. And so how problematic is it that the authorities have been so lazy about these redactions, but also the mistakes that they've made? And do you think there is any kind of intentional desire to expose victims because that's almost them kind of getting back at this whole affair? Maybe.
I think I see a lot of pattern similarity in the bombing of a school and the redacted files that weren't, that had little Adobe squares over them that you could remove. Right. Like, it is shoddy and sloppy and without regard for harm. And that character trait shows up in multiple different ways across these big stories. And at some point, people are like, enough is enough. We want professionals in charge again. We want expertise. We want education. I think this is going to bite. If we make it to midterms, it's going to bite hard at midterms.
Yes. Because the irony is that when it came to the information that was identifying powerful business and political figures who were alleged co-conspirators or material witnesses, the DOJ appeared to have heavily redacted those records, but been sloppy over the names of victims.
Yeah. Someday it's going to get called. Their number's going to get called. Someday Pam Bondi's not going to have the protections she has over her. There will be an accounting.
Yes. Well, some senators were calling for the bar to be removed from her and for these, I mean, we're starting to see that, with Lindsay Halligan and others that they're...
Christy Noem's out, Yes.
So there is some change, although Christy Noem is now running Shield of the Americas or whatever that is, like a Marvel movie follow-up, I guess. Let's just move into the DHS area just for a moment, because, there are some weird connections. And that's the thing, when we talk about these things in this way, we do start to see the links. And a memo that was sent out in February the 19th was sent to civilians across the Department of Defense. And Pete Hegseth wrote that he expects every supervisor to encourage their civilian employees to volunteer for DHS immigration enforcement, and said that leadership must continue to promote this detailed program and educate their civilian employees of the importance of, I think it was entitled Department of War Guidance to Encourage Support to the Department of Homeland Security, Southern Border and Internal Immigration Enforcement Missions. And this was sent to thousands of civilian DoD employees. This suggests that this ethnic cleansing that we spoke about earlier is so embedded in these kind of eugenicists' minds that it is an all-out war. It is a civil war of sorts, maybe not in name, but actually what Hegseth has in mind and what Stephen Miller has in his mind and what Donald Trump is being, he injected with into his mind. I don't think he has many thoughts of his own anymore. It is all leading to this same place that you identified earlier.
Right. It is neighbor against neighbor. It is cleansing those who disagree with you. It's just the tactic that they're using at home to the same ends that they're using overseas. Those same evangelical groups grew up studying Corrie ten Boom, who sheltered Jews in her home. They grew up believing that they would be on the good side of fascism, if it returned, that they would not be the Nazis in the situation. I hope there's a lot of civil disobedience happening. I hope that there's a lot of people that are, answering the call to obey Jesus, to love your neighbor, not so much, storm the Capitol, different kinds of Christians.
Right.
They do have choices. But it's disheartening to me because I do feel like we're in the civil holy war that they had been calling for the past 50 years. And it just looks different because we're in modern society with technology at our disposal. We don't have to fight like we did in the original Civil War. We can do it much more covertly. And that's sometimes very protective for evil. So I do think we should take it seriously and that it is exactly what it sounds like. If it lands that way for you, I affirm that for you because that is what's being suggested.
Well, I say to people who ask, how bad is it going to get? And I say, whatever your worst fears, like go with your instinct, because
right.
It's almost like this is a criminal fraternity. Like all these people who are in these senior positions, they think like criminals. They don't appear to have anything about them that is straight. It's right. Like, and for decades, especially with Trump, they've hated having to conform to the laws of the land. And so now they've got the power. They're able to push back against any rules, whether it be rules on housing and planning and pollution, or even on modern warfare.
Yeah. And they really interpreted all of that hold back time as persecution. Right. So it fed their narrative that we're being persecuted. I think to bring it back to the original point about using fear as manipulation, and if you are hearing this and you're feeling very afraid because your worst fears could come true, if that's what you heard, please don't lock on to that.
Yeah.
The difference is they're using phantom fears. They're using suggestive fears. What we have is known patterns, evidence, and their own words to hold them accountable to. We have reality to hold them accountable to. So we are nervous, maybe we're fearful of what could happen, but we have actual tangible steps we can take. We have a legal process, due process, we have checks and balances, we have elections, we have democracy still. We are an older country. This isn't a brand new country. So, we have recourse, whereas they are just blowing smoke, suggesting things, covering things up, shoddy work, shoddy non-professionalism never goes the distance. There's no way they're going to last the distance. They just don't have the inner integrity for that. So that should give listeners some reassurance. If you're looking for concrete facts, they are available. You can listen to this with your own ears and hear what they say, and then compare that to their actual actions. And I find that to be very grounding.
So let's just suppose that, it's approaching November and Trump's opinion polls are still through the floor. I mean, he's polling in the mid-30s. The war is entirely unwanted by the majority of Americans. Gas prices are still somewhere between $4 and $8, depending on where you live. The price of a barrel of oil has punched through $100 now. This is very problematic for Donald Trump politically, to kind of rig the whole system against a country that politically is done with him. They can see that he has failed to deliver on everything. And I'm talking right across the board here. This is a kind of non-partisan moment. However, knowing what you know of the mindset of Trump and that Christian nationalist movement, and also the puppeteers, the Peter Thiels of this world, and the people that are, funding a lot of this and really, have a lot of control. How do they get out of this if they're going to lose the midterms and potentially lose in 2028? And Trump doesn't want to go anywhere, and he's built his bunker/ballroom by then. Is it simply the case that they'll just barricade in and claim that the elections were insufficient or illegal or something? And because that's what I worry about. That because we've seen that the rules don't seem to apply to them now, they'll just make sure that they don't apply then either.
Yeah. So historically, that's the case. Historically, that's what they do. They pull back and they double down and they hide and they sequester, and they might lose a little ground, but they concede it almost, in order to re-strengthen. So that is what's always happened before. And if it happens again, we have to make the most of our chance to catch our breath. There's no reason to think it's really going to go differently. I mean, even in those extreme circles, there are people who understand nuclear caution. And there's the majority is on our side. The majority is on the side of science and progress and reason. So, I am a little more concerned with large interference with the numbers. I personally am not sure Donald Trump ever won an election because of election interference. So I hope that that's where we get some of our answers is in those preventative steps, the retention of mail balloting, women's vote. Obviously I want women to keep voting. I think the spin doctor stories that we're going to get, as the year progresses are just going to go up, up, up. They're going to have desperate moments, maybe take our elections from us temporarily. We just have to know that we see through it. I think people need to remember, try to keep the perspective, the long road in frame. They're going to try and reinvent it. They're going to try to replace him. They're going to try to make us afraid and make us knee jerk. That's what happened with the ethnic votes that we had, with promises to different groups that turned out to be hollow. So I just my whole hope always goes into this is not going to hold, and I want them to not be so relevant in my life, and that is survival for me. Survival is how can I make Christian nationalism less impactful in my life? How can I,
right. Well, what's interesting is that there doesn't appear to be another candidate like Donald Trump to replace Donald Trump.
There's not.
And so when you take away the gang leader, the gang invariably dissipates. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is what will happen? I mean, Trump is clearly unwell, and people are kind of taking advantage of the neck rash and the cankles and the hand to kind of think that it's his end of days. But I'm not so sure. I think he's got some gas left in the tank yet. But let's just say that hypothetically that he didn't survive this term just for, health reasons, that what happens to this Christian nationalist far-right ethnic cleansing movement? Does it become diluted? Does it fragment? Or is there enough momentum in it that it continues even without the orange leader?
No, I think it does what all cult groups do when their leader breaks. It just dissolves into chaos. It will dissipate. People will fall away. They will have always been against this. They will change their minds. They will try to distance themselves from positions they were quite vocal about. The internet obviously keeps a nice record of receipts. We do have a lot of proof that they really did think that, but I think they will meld back into society, and there will be new emergent leaders that try to monopolize on that, but they will never do what he has done. He is a unique creature in history. He's united people. He's made people afraid of him. Our Congress is out to lunch in large part because he has something on them. I mean, who knows? But I think it'll be just enormously relieving to the globe when there is no more Donald Trump on this planet. And I think he knows that.
It's so interesting how, I do a lot of reporting in Europe, and I see the kind of rhetoric there, and I'm very interested in how European politicians see right through him. So to him, to them, he is completely illegitimate. And they say it out loud in their own parliaments, that this guy is an idiot, and he's a joke, and it's ridiculous. And and unfortunately, it's trade that he has leveraged. And so a lot of these nations need to trade with the US. And so that's how he's kind of got them in a dodgy business deal. Surprise, surprise. But that seems to be the only redeeming feature of America right now. And what are the chances that these allies or former allies who've kind of woken up to the fact that America is not to be trusted, whether with Donald Trump in charge or someone else, because so many of these alliances now have imploded, and Trump is clearly pivoting to align with Russia. Do you think it's redeemable? Do you think if Gavin Newsom was to win the presidency, like things would come back, or do you think the trust is broken for good?
I don't think anything's broken for good. That's Tia's bend in the world. But I do think that we have a reckoning, and we have a complicity that we have to be accountable for, that we deserve to have a timeout. We deserve to have a time where we repent for our sins, basically, to use religious language. And we have fucked up here. This is a problem. We have not shown ourselves to be trustworthy. We've turned our back on the world, and we elected someone and then allowed him to persist in power against global interests and against our promises. And it is completely reasonable to hold us accountable for that for a time. And then if we really want that allyship back, we will do the work to show it. We'll, as you would in a relationship with broken trust, you would earn that trust back, and you would do it with serious leadership and serious commitment to the future.
Because it's not just the fact that Trump is the anomaly. The anomaly is also that the American people voted for him a second time, even after January 6th. I mean, you mentioned earlier that you now don't really believe that he ever won an election. I think people are waking up to the fact that if he could get away with manipulating and rigging through whatever means elections to win, whether it be 2016 and Russian interference, or whether it be 2024, it's a situation, isn't it, that he, as a lifelong con man, would totally take advantage of.
Yeah, it's on brand completely. I think I saw something in an Epstein file release that suggested that the reason why he didn't win in 2020 was because of mail-in ballots. And that's why he was so angry about the mail-in ballots, because it was outside of his sphere of control.
Right.
And so that's really telling, and I would like to see that followed up on. I would like more information on that, please. But he's taken a decade of our life. He's irreparably harmed our country. And there needs to be an atonement and an accounting.
Okay. I'm so grateful to you, and I'm fascinated by the lens with which you see the world. I wish you luck with the new book. I think that's out in June, and your Substack is amazing too, and I'll link that down below. But for now, Tia Levings, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
Thank you so much.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. You can find me on Substack too at The Anthony Davis, or you can join the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.